Lena owned a little cafe tucked in a sleepy corner of the city. It wasn't fancy, just a cozy spot with a handful of tables and a counter where locals sometimes lingered for a cup of coffee and a warm chat. Business hadn't been great lately. Every week felt like a fight to stay afloat, but Lena poured her heart into the cafe, just as she had for the past 6 years. On a cold, stormy evening, as rain lashed against the cafe's windows, Lena was debating whether to close early. The streets outside were deserted, and she doubted anyone would wander in. She was lost in her thoughts, staring at the pile of bills she couldn't pay, when the cafe door creaked open. Startled, she looked up and saw an elderly man standing there. His clothes were soaked, and water dripped onto the wooden floor. He looked frail, his face pale and his hands trembling as he held onto the doorframe for support. Lena approached him, her heart sinking. "Can I help you?" she asked gently, handing him a clean cloth to dry off. The man hesitated. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice barely audible. "I haven't had anything to eat in 2 days. I don't have any money." Lena's heart ached. She thought of her own struggles, the mounting debts, the worry of providing for her son Max, who was just 10, and her little girl Anna, barely 8. Yet, as she looked into the man's weary eyes, she made a decision. "Come, sit down," she said. "Let me get you something warm." The man tried to protest, but Lena was already in the kitchen, her hands moving instinctively as she prepared a meal. She decided on her signature tomato basil soup, the one her late grandmother used to make on cold days. As the soup simmered, she sliced fresh bread and toasted it until the edges turned golden. The aroma filled the air, momentarily lifting the heaviness in her heart. While she worked, memories of her past surfaced. Lena had come to this city with nothing but a suitcase and 2 young children after her husband's sudden passing. She knew what it felt like to go to bed hungry, praying for a miracle. Perhaps, tonight, she could be someone's miracle. When the food was ready, she brought it to the man, who had settled into a corner seat. He looked up at her with gratitude that words couldn't capture. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Eat slowly," Lena said with a smile. "There's plenty." The man introduced himself as Harold. Between spoonfuls of soup, he shared fragments of his life. Once a schoolteacher, he had lost his job due to budget cuts. His wife had passed away years ago, and with no family nearby, he'd struggled to make ends meet. "I used to help so many children learn to read and dream big," Harold said wistfully. "Now, I can't even afford a loaf of bread." Lena listened intently, sharing bits of her story in return. Harold reminded her of her father, who had worked tirelessly to provide for their family back home. It was strange how life brought people together in the most unexpected ways. As Harold finished his meal, Lena noticed the color returning to his face. He looked at peace for the first time since he walked through the door. Before leaving, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. "I don't have money to give you," he said, "but this is something I think you should have." He left the paper on the table and gave Lena a warm smile. "You've done more for me tonight than anyone has in years." "Thank you." Before she could say more, Harold slipped out into the rain, disappearing into the night. Lena sat at the table and unfolded the note. It wasn't just a thank you, it was a heartfelt message of hope and a reminder to believe in the goodness she carried in her heart. Beneath the words was a line that caught her eye, an address, followed by the words, "Trust this gift will return to you." Curiosity burned in Lena's mind. The next morning, she visited the address. It led her to a small community center, where a group of people greeted her warmly. Harold had apparently been a volunteer there years ago, and the center had a program that offered grants to struggling local businesses. With their guidance, Lena applied for support, and within weeks, her cafe received the help it desperately needed. Harold never returned to the cafe, but Lena thought of him often. She kept his note framed on the wall, a daily reminder of how one small act of kindness could ripple outward in ways she never imagined. As Harold stood to leave, he gently placed a folded note on the counter. Lena noticed and tried to stop him. "You don't owe me anything," she insisted, reaching for it. But he smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and walked to the door. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. Harold paused at the doorway, turned to give her one last nod, and disappeared into the night. Lena hesitated before picking up the note, expecting a simple thank you. Instead, as she unfolded it, her heart raced. Her hands trembled as her eyes moved over the neat, handwritten lines. What she read made her sit down, her breath catching in disbelief. The note wasn't just gratitude, it was a revelation. Harold wasn't merely a retired teacher. He had been a leading consultant for a nationwide group of community kitchens and small eateries, helping struggling businesses flourish. The note revealed something even more surprising. Harold had been observing Lena's cafe for weeks, taking note of her kindness, her dedication, and the warmth she brought to her customers. "I've been searching for someone like you," the letter read. "Your heart is what makes this place special. Tomorrow, I'll return with people who believe in investing in genuine, hard-working individuals like you. I see extraordinary potential here, and I want to help you take this cafe to heights you've only dreamed of." Lena's mind spun. She read the letter again and again, trying to process the mention of potential investors. Harold had referenced names she vaguely recognized from local headlines, people known for revitalizing small businesses into thriving community staples. Was this real? Or just a kind gesture to lift her spirits? That night, Lena barely slept. Instead, she cleaned the cafe from top to bottom, polishing the countertops, adjusting the curtains, and arranging the tables just so. She baked extra pastries, prepared her best recipes, and imagined what this mysterious opportunity might mean for her family. The next morning, Lena opened the cafe earlier than usual. She brewed the freshest coffee and placed warm croissants on display. Every time the door jingled, her heart leapt, wondering if Harold's promised visitors had arrived. By noon, just as her nerves began to get the better of her, the bell chimed again. This time, a group of impeccably dressed individuals walked in, accompanied by Harold. He looked completely different, no longer the frail man from the night before. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture straight, exuding a quiet confidence. "Lena," Harold said warmly, "I'd like you to meet some friends of mine." The group spread out, studying the cafe's small but cozy interior. They ordered from her menu, coffee, soup, and sandwiches. As Lena worked in the kitchen, her hands trembled, but she focused on pouring all her love and care into the food. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Cook as if you're feeding someone you love." The visitors stayed for nearly 2 hours. They talked softly among themselves, nodding as they tasted her food. Harold walked them around, gesturing to the little details, the checkered curtains, the handwritten menu on the chalkboard, and the tiny shelf of books for children. "This is what community feels like," he told them. As they prepared to leave, one of the investors approached Lena at the counter. "You've created something special here," she said. "We want to help you grow this into something even greater." The plan they laid out was both thrilling and overwhelming. They wanted to expand Lena's cafe, not just locally but into a small chain of neighborhood spots that maintained the same warmth and authenticity. "We'll keep your recipes and your approach intact," another investor assured her. "We'll simply give you the resources to reach more people." The changes began almost immediately. Within weeks, the cafe expanded into the vacant space next door, allowing for more tables and a larger kitchen. Lena hired a few staff members, easing the burden she'd carried alone for years. Harold stayed by her side throughout the process, guiding her through contracts and helping her navigate the unfamiliar world of business. But Lena insisted on one rule: no one leaves hungry, she told her staff. Even if they can't pay. It was a philosophy she held close, born from her own struggles. Over the next year, 3 new cafe locations opened, each designed to feel just as warm and inviting as the original. Lena personally trained every staff member, teaching them her grandmother's recipes and her philosophy of treating every customer like family. The menu stayed simple but heartfelt, comfort food that nourished the soul. Her life transformed in ways she never thought possible. Lena moved her children to a safer neighborhood with better schools. Max and Anna often helped out at the cafe on weekends, learning the recipes and greeting customers. The cafes became a beacon of hope in the community, offering jobs to people in need and serving meals to those who couldn't afford them. Harold visited every week, always ordering the tomato basil soup that had started it all. One day, as they sat together in the cafe's now bustling dining room, he said, "You know, Lena, this place isn't just about the food. It's about the kindness you put into every bowl, every plate. That's what people come here for." Lena smiled, her eyes glancing toward the framed note that hung on the cafe wall. Harold's words had sparked everything, and she kept them as a reminder of how one small act of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in unimaginable ways. Lena's cafe had become more than just a place to eat. It was a haven for the community, a place where warmth, generosity, and connection thrived. As the months turned into years, Lena's dream evolved beyond her wildest imagination. The small, struggling cafe that once barely made enough to pay the bills was now a network of beloved neighborhood spots, each one echoing the heart and soul of the original. One sunny afternoon, Lena sat in her newly renovated cafe, watching the hum of activity. Regulars chatted over coffee, children laughed as they picked out cookies from the display case, and her staff moved gracefully between tables, greeting each customer with genuine care. It was everything she had ever hoped for, and more. Yet, Lena's thoughts often circled back to the night it all began, when a man named Harold had walked in from the rain, hungry and lost. She had never imagined how that simple act of kindness, serving him a warm bowl of soup, would set off a chain reaction that changed not only her life but the lives of countless others. The framed note Harold had left her still hung in her office, now joined by photos of her team, smiling customers, and newspaper clippings celebrating the cafe's success. Lena stood and walked over to the wall of photos, her fingers brushing over a picture of her children, Max and Anna, standing proudly in their uniforms. They were growing up so quickly, learning the values of hard work, compassion, and community. "You've come so far," Lena whispered to herself, a tear forming in her eye. As if on cue, the familiar chime of the cafe door broke her reverie. She turned to see Harold stepping inside, his smile as warm as ever. Though his hair was grayer now and his gait a little slower, his presence always seemed to light up the room. The staff greeted him enthusiastically, he was something of a legend among them, and Lena quickly made her way to his table, carrying a steaming bowl of tomato basil soup. "Still your favorite, I presume?" she teased, setting it down in front of him. "Always," Harold replied with a chuckle. "Though, truth be told, I come back for the company more than the soup." They shared a warm laugh, the kind that spoke of years of friendship and mutual respect. As Harold began eating, Lena sat across from him, marveling at how far they had come. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think kindness was just something small, something quiet and personal. I didn't realize it could ripple out and change so much." Harold nodded, setting down his spoon. "Kindness has a way of spreading," he said. "And when it meets the right heart, like yours, it becomes unstoppable." Lena smiled, her heart full. She looked around at her thriving cafe, the people it brought together, and the lives it touched. Harold was right. Kindness was unstoppable. And it all began with a single bowl of soup on a rainy night.